As our size grew, so did our influence. Everyone, including Israel's enemies, began to sit up and take notice as CUFI became a political powerhouse.
Through Christians United for Israel, more than 3.3 million believers raised their voices, have not been silent in support of Israel. And you can be heard in every city and town across America and in every office on Capitol Hill. And rest assured, the man down the street at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue hears you too.
CUFI's transformation into a heavyweight in Washington began to speed up when we threw our influence behind the Taylor Force Act, which was passed after CUFI members sent more than 1 million emails to Congress.
Our first goal today is to thank the leadership, the staff, and most importantly you, the members and friends of CUFI, for your early, strong, and obviously effective support of the Taylor Force Act.
We played a key role in helping several pro-Israel members of the President's administration win tough confirmation battles in the Senate. With our newfound size and influential voice, when Israel is threatened in any way, CUFI is poised to deliver a strong counterpunch, and our impact is being felt and seen in the halls of power.
Thank you for always standing with Israel. You're truly among our greatest friends in the world. I cherish that friendship.
For decades, America has been the backbone of Israel's support in the world. Well, the backbone of that backbone is the support of millions of devout Christians across this great country. More than any other Christian organization, CUFI works year after year to make that backbone stronger and straighter than ever.
The favor of God is with this organization. Listen to it, enemies of Israel. We're coming for you.
God has granted us a unique role to play during this critical time in Israel and America's history. We dare not waste a single opportunity.
Let us renew our finest efforts. Let us be courageous in this fight. Let us not be afraid of those who oppose us. Let us recognize that God is with us. Therefore, nothing is impossible to us. I believe the best is yet to be. Good morning, good morning, good morning. God bless the early birds who are here this morning. I think you need to clap real loud for about 30 seconds. There's some of you that are kind of, can we do it? Thank you. And thank you for being here. It's my privilege this morning to introduce Senator Roy Blunt, the Republican from Missouri. He holds multiple leadership positions in the Senate, including chairman of the Republican Policy Committee and chairman of the Senate Rules Committee. He also serves on the Senate Appropriations Committee. In 2014, he was the lead Senate sponsor of the Near East and South Central Asia Religious Freedom Act, which became law that year. In 2016, Senator Blunt introduced the Taylor Force Act, which we were very, very instrumental in getting passed. Taylor Force Act with Senators Lindsey Graham and Dan Coates. Senator Blunt is also a co-sponsor of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. Can we hear a hallelujah for that? Frequently calling Israel one of America's closest friends and allies, Senator Blunt is a resilient supporter of strengthening the U.S.-Israel relationship. I have known Senator Blunt for many years. He is a loyal American. He is a dedicated Christian. America is privileged to have this man in the U.S. Senate. Will you give him a thundering welcome as he comes this morning to speak?
Thank you all. Thank you all. It's early, so if you want to stand up, it's okay. Thank you all. Thank you all. Sit back down. You've got a big day in front of you. I am glad to be here as you started. I'm glad to be here as you're still in the excited glow of the pastor's great presentation last night and the other presentations you heard yesterday. John Hagee has made an incredible difference in what he has done with Christians United for Israel. I went to his office. I went to his office in San Antonio maybe 15 years ago as this was all beginning to take shape in such an incredible way. And he said, I thought a decade ago I tried to do this and people weren't ready yet, but he didn't give up. God didn't give up. Christians United for Israel is a great force in the country today. You know, this year I'm reading the Old Testament. I decided late in the year last year, I looked at my read the Bible in a year Bible and said, well, it's about time I did that again. So I started on January the 7th, I was 4 days behind. And so I decided, I'm not going to read the Bible this year, I'm going to read the Old Testament this year, and that is exactly what I've been doing. The prophets, Elisha, Elijah, Samuel, the leaders like David and Esther, who born for a time such as this, all in the Old Testament. But some of the Old Testament's a little challenging for me, I will say. Numbers, right now I'm in Chronicles. Though this morning at 5:15, I was reading the July 9th verses for the chapter for Chronicles. It was 1 Chronicles 7:1. And so I'm thinking, I'm going to come over and speak to you all today. Surely there is a great message in 1 Chronicles 7:1, which reads, the sons of Issachar, Tula, Puka, Zabka, and Sharam, 4 in all. And then it didn't seem to do everything I was hoping it would do, so I went to 1 Chronicles 7:2, which starts, the sons of Tula. And of course, if you're familiar with Chronicles, it's exactly that. Just like Numbers was exactly that. And I sat there and I thought for a minute, what is the message here for me? I'm struggling through Chronicles anyway, and to tell you the truth, I'm having a hard time reading every name of every verse. And then it occurred to me, wait a minute, God's people always mattered to God. Always mattered. Billy, nice to see you this morning. God's people always mattered to God, and whether they were born in God's covenant or saved by the grace of Jesus Christ, God's people always matter to God. He kept track of them. He inspired people to make a list of them. He counted them. God's people always matter to God. And of course, people always had enemies, just like God always has enemies. And today you could list some of those enemies, and they've been listed for you by speakers you've had here. Iran, clearly an enemy of God's people. Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the list is longer than it has been in recent history. You know, President Trump looked at that nuclear agreement and just said, we're not going to do that. And I was in NATO the other day. I was speaking to people at NATO, and I said, well, you know, that if President Obama had really wanted that agreement to be a binding agreement, he should have brought it to the Congress and let the Congress verify it. But he knew they wouldn't do that. He also believed that if he entered into an agreement, it would be so incredibly powerful, since he decided to agree to it, that the next president would have to go along as well, no matter what the next president really thought or the next Congress thought. What he didn't anticipate is that Donald Trump would be the next president and would just say no. The President Trump would just say, no, we are not going to do this. And by the way, you see Iran now saying, well, we're moving beyond the agreement. We're enriching at a level that we wouldn't have been able to under the agreement, but they're not enriching at a level that they wouldn't have been able to at the end of the agreement. You know, what difference has a decade made to Iran? What difference does a decade make to Hezbollah? What difference does a decade make to Hamas? It doesn't make a difference at all. And clearly, they were on a path and will be on a path unless we stop them with sanctions or whatever is necessary to have a nuclear weapon. Iran needs nuclear energy like, well, obviously Iran doesn't need nuclear energy. The energy that they have, that they sell to people all over the world, there is no reason to be in that mode of nuclear development except to have a nuclear weapon. And the number one target, of course, of that nuclear weapon would be the state of Israel. And the number two enemy of that nuclear country and that nuclear weapon would be the best friend of Israel, the United States of America. And the president saying we're not going to go in that direction, and to our allies saying if you want to go in that direction, you're going to have to do that without being a trading partner of the United States. You're going to have to do that without using the banking system and the financial system used all over the world of the United States. And this is an important thing to say. Today you're going to be, as you have, many of you have been already, visiting the people in Washington that work for you. This is a really important thing to remember as you go about your business today. The boss is in town, and that's you. The boss is in town, and that's you. And don't be meeting with members of the House and Senate, meeting with senators, as I will with our friends from Missouri today, is make the most of that, but also make the most of it when, if for some reason you wind up meeting with congressional staff. Don't assume that meeting is not a meeting that suddenly loses importance. You need to get your message across. You need to get your friendship for Israel across. You need to talk in the powerful way that you heard last night about the Anti-Semitic Awareness Act that I'm a co-sponsor of. You need to talk about what that act does. You need to talk about the very obvious and evident growth of anti-Semitism in Europe, in the United States, on college campuses. You need to talk about the findings in that act, which I'm sure you heard about last night. That, and the findings act says, look, Jews clearly in America and around the world, and particularly in America, continue to face charges of divided loyalty. Just like some of you are charged with divided loyalty. When people say to you, well, are you for Israel or the United States of America? The answer is yes. I'm for Israel and the United States of America. There is a bond there that matters. The act that you're going to be talking about today, among other things, the Anti-Semitic Awareness Act, talks about the false claim that Israel and Jews in America continue to use their money to buy political access and political power. What was that member of Congress said? All about the Benjamins. All about the Benjamins. All about the Benjamins means lots of things, but among other things it means, well, it's all about the money. You're going to talk about the resurgence of the old ways that Jews were discriminated against. You're going to talk about the ways that Jews are discriminated against in Jewish organizations on campuses, just like Christian organizations are discriminated against on campus. I've also this year I've been the principal sponsor of the Equal Campus Access Act, which says that religious organizations should have the same ability to form on campuses that any other organization would have to form on campuses. Now, 243 years ago this week, of course, we all know what happened, the Great Declaration of who we would be, the Declaration of Independence. But also that same week in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention, they formed a committee after the Declaration. If we're going to be independent, we've got to have things that symbolize ourselves as a country. And so they formed a committee to develop a seal for the United States of America. And interestingly, for the purpose that you're here today, two of the people on that committee, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, both proposed an idea for the seal of the United States of America that was not only based in the Old Testament, but it was based in Exodus. Benjamin Franklin said, I think the seal of the United States of America should include Moses parting the waters at the Red Sea. And Thomas Jefferson said, I think the seal of the United States of America should show the children of Israel being guided by a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Sounds like to me that from the very first, we were pretty deeply ingrained and committed to the idea of Israel, to the idea of God's chosen people. And that was happening 243 years ago as the country was just beginning to decide what it would stand for as a country. And also the Liberty Bell was being cast at about the same time. And on the Liberty Bell, another book of the Bible that I have a little stress with on occasions, Leviticus, there is from Leviticus on the Liberty Bell, it says, proclaim liberty throughout the land. Our commitment to Israel, our commitment to the covenant, our commitment to the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, comes from the very first moments of our inception as a country. Christians united for Israel are here for a great purpose. The boss is in town. Talk to the people that work for you today about what you'd like to see them do. I am proud of you, and I'm proud to be here with you today. Thank all of you.
Thank you, Senator Blunt. We all need to pray for him as he confronts Leviticus. That's where I get stuck myself, people. Good morning. Are we on? I know we're like caffeinated by, we're caffeinated. We're running just solely on caffeine. For me, it's just the lip gloss and hairspray holding me together after yesterday. But what a high. So much energy from everybody that we heard from yesterday, culminating with Ambassador Friedman last night. Thank each and every one of you for coming this morning, despite the longest yet grandest of days, to learn about what you can do to stand on behalf of Israel. As much as we've done and as much as we've seen this summit, this day, and what you're gonna learn this day and what you're gonna take to the Hill this day is why you're here. This is the most important part of what we do. And the senator said it, that's because you're the boss. How many of you have never been to Summit before or lobbied your congressmen or senators before, just by show of hands? Okay, so how many of you pay taxes? How many of you vote? You're the most qualified people to go do what you're going to do today. It's like the senator said, you're the boss. And so many times, I know we've spoken to our congressional liaisons and other people that are interfacing now more regularly with the members of Congress. And they talk about, sometimes we get shut down. Not everybody gets to go meet with Senator Blunt. And not everybody gets to go meet with somebody that thinks the way we do and votes the way that we do. And so I want to encourage you this morning, remember the parable of the persistent widow in Luke, the New Testament? Love those parables. The persistent widow, it says in there the purpose of this parable is to tell us, do not quit, do not give up. Because her judge, this is not a commentary on any congressman, so nobody misquote me. In the parable, her judge said was unrighteous, didn't care what people thought, and didn't fear God, which is kind of like a really bad politician if you're not even caring what people think. He was unrighteous, he didn't care what people thought, and he didn't fear God. Yet she would go to him relentlessly and say, I need justice. I need victory against my adversary. And he didn't do anything about it because he didn't care about what people thought. And the Bible very clearly says that for some time, he didn't do anything about it because he didn't care what people thought. But at the end of the day, he gave her justice against her adversary, and he literally said, it's not because I fear God, and it's not because I care what people think, it's because she's bothering me. And I don't want her to come after me and attack me later. So people, there's a nice way to do everything, but at the end of the day, we can just respectfully bother people until they give us what we want, right? And I say the word respect because no matter what, as you go into these meetings, you always need to be respectful. You're a reflection of CUFI. We are, in fact, Christians united for Israel. So we will show people who we are by our love. But when the Bible says stand at the door and knock, and for those of you who came to leadership, you heard me do it, we're fine. You say no, we're going to stand there, we're going to knock. We're going to come back again, we're going to keep knocking, and we're going to approach this with shameless persistence because when your cause is Israel, you cannot fail. And it doesn't matter who your judge is, it doesn't matter who you're meetings with. It matters what you're doing and who you're doing it for. And God is going to honor that. So I tell that to you to be encouraged today as you go in these meetings. You need to walk into them with holy boldness, knowing that you are children of the King, that you have favor, and that where your cause is Israel, you absolutely cannot fail. Yes, amen. Let's start applauding this morning. How many of you have downloaded the app? Okay, that's not enough of you. I recommend that you download the app for a couple of reasons. First of all, if there are any changes to your appointments with your congressman, they're going to be reflected on the app. It's literally customized. It says my appointments, so that's good to have. Secondly, how many of you are CLs? Where are my CLs at? Congressional Liaisons. Yes. Hi, Nellie. How are you? So, ladies and gentlemen, the Congressional Liaison Program, which is spearheaded by Randy Neal, is an opportunity for each of you to become more engaged at the local level. What we do here is the most important thing that we do all year in terms of you all interfacing with your elected representatives in Washington, D.C. If you want to do this more, you have the opportunity to do so at the local level when your representatives go back home, go to their home offices. Legislation happens at the local level as well. And what a nice surprise. What a parable of the persistent widow. If after you went home from Washington, you showed up at their office and said, hey, someone want to talk about the local level? You know that BDS issue? Need to get that cleaned up here. Remember me from Washington, D.C.? That is what you get to do as a CL. You get to engage on behalf of the state of Israel at the local level. It's spearheaded by Randy Neal and by Lilia Bychuk. And we have calls throughout the year keeping you updated on legislation that we're working on locally, keeping you updated on what we're going to be looking at doing at the summit. And if you want to get involved, there's more information in the booths outside about how you can sign up and register to do that. We would love to have you. Anyway, I brought up the CLs because in our meetings, when we've been talking about the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, if there's one thing you're going to get from this day, it's the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. What that act does, very simply, is adopts the working definition of anti-Semitism. And I'll explain why that matters later in our talking points. But on the app, you have the working definition of anti-Semitism, because we keep saying it, you can't defeat what you can't define. we need to adopt the working definition of anti-Semitism. And they said, well, what is it and can we see it? And so I'm just gonna read for you this really controversial definition that's taken years in terms of legislative effort to try to get passed. Are you ready? Buckle your seatbelts. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and/or their property, towards Jewish community, institutions, and religious facilities. I don't see the problem. I don't see the controversy. I don't know why it's so difficult to get that definition passed as a standard by which to judge the harassment that happens on college and university campuses increasingly all the time. And one of the things that this definition has that's included, that you'll see on the app as soon as you download it, is a lot of examples of what anti-Semitism is. You heard Senator Blunt talk about it. We see anti-Semitism so much every day, people are becoming inoculated. They don't know what they're looking at. They think so long as somebody's not wearing, a white hood and screaming vitriol, you've seen it in our videos here, you should go back to the fire. Nellie told me yesterday, she's from North Carolina. She said, I was told that I should have burned in Hitler's oven when I was in college in North Carolina. And Christians United for Israel on campus was the only organization that stood with me. She experienced that. And there's a lot of people like her that are experiencing the same thing every day. But the thing is, a lot of times, it doesn't present itself that way. And this definition has examples of what we call the anti-Semitism that hides in plain sight. You heard Irving talk about it. It starts with words. People say, I'm not anti-Semite, I'm anti-Zion, I'm anti-Israel, I'm anti-apartheid. They weaponize our words in order to harm our friends. And we're not gonna allow it. And that's why this definition is so important. That's why applying a definition that the State Department already uses to gauge whether or not anti-Semitism is happening in all other parts of the world, why it needs to be adopted by the Department of Education. So let me just read for you couple of these examples. Accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group. This is a really good example of anti-Semitism today, but also a really good example in terms of people don't even see that and think anti-Semitism. They're like, oh, they just don't disagree. Oh, they just don't get along. And one of the things that you're gonna get the largest amount of pushback today for anybody that isn't co-sponsoring the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, one of the things that you're gonna hear is, look, we're with you, we agree, but we have some free speech concerns. Okay. This has nothing to do with speech. So we all just promise me that if anybody says that, just have the gumption to look at them and go, this has nothing to do with speech. Because I guarantee you, A, they haven't heard it. B, what this statute does is regulate conduct, okay? So specifically, this statute says, again, it's Department of Education, so we're talking about schools, colleges, and universities, okay? It says where harassment has taken place, harassment. Then, so that means after the fact, you can use this definition to consider whether that harassment was motivated by anti-Semitism. That's it. So this statute actually has nothing to do with speech. As awful as what Nellie experienced on her campus in North Carolina, this statute has nothing to do with that unless it was coupled with action, unless it was coupled with harassment. Does that make sense? So if somebody looks at you and says, I'm with you, but free speech, you say, this has nothing to do with speech, this regulates conduct, okay? So where harassment has taken place against a student first, so that's a totally different determination, then you consider the definition. Because you cannot defeat, you heard Pastor say it yesterday, you cannot defeat what you will not define. And we have seen anti-Semitism on college campuses continue to increase relentlessly. but exactly 0 claims under Title VI using this definition or for anti-Semitism against Jewish students has been used. And that's either because they don't know what anti-Semitism is, or they're ignoring it. And because we choose to believe in people's better angels, we choose to believe that the people who have given their lives to educate the young people of America certainly would not ignore the plight of a people group, we say you need a definition. And so consider this definition. And I hate to beat a dead horse because I know probably most of you sitting there going, this is the biggest, most uncontroversial, unnewsworthy, nothing burger. Why is this even being held up? And that's an excellent question. It's taken many years to get to this point. And Israel does not need to become a political football. Israel was one issue that regardless of party affiliation, we could all coalesce around and say that she's a strategic ally, she's our friend and neighbor, she's the only democracy in the Middle East. Let's do what we can to help Israel, let's do what we can to help her people. And unfortunately, right now with the current political climate, it's not always that way. And as we are a nonpartisan organization, we're here to give each party the opportunity to do the right thing concerning Israel and the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. So what are you gonna do before you meet with your representatives? You're gonna download the app. You're gonna look at your appointments. It's very important that you keep those. Lilia Bychuk, I don't know if she's in this room. I don't know if you all realize that we have one woman that works all year to schedule each and every one of your appointments. And I don't know if she's in this room, but she deserves our applause and our praise. She has the best attitude doing it. I will tell you, she gave us the update this morning, 98% of you have appointments this afternoon. Thank you, Lilia. And I'm not gonna name names, but there are 9 who said no, not 9 of you, 9 representatives who turned us down. So we'll figure that out. We'll see them next year, remember? Hi, it's me again, standing at the door. I'm knocking. I'm just here to bother you, albeit respectfully. Which we're gonna talk more about the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act later. But I did want to let you know, in downloading the app, you do have the definition so that you can see it, you can become familiar with it. If you have some exchanges back and forth with your representatives, we want you to feel confident that you know what you're talking about with them this afternoon. Which is another kind of house cleaning item. Your talking points that you'll get, and I know you don't have them now, so don't be afraid, but they're 5 pages long. That's for your information. Nobody expects you to A, memorize it, or B, go into your meeting reading all of that content. We want you to just be equipped with everything that you need in order to engage as effectively as possible. The goal from the document that you're going to get is to A, talk about the pieces of legislation that we're sponsoring. Basically, everything that you need to talk about is in bold. Out of the 5 pages, there's smaller amounts of content that are bolded. The things that are bolded are the pieces of legislation that we're sponsoring, their bill numbers, who co-sponsored them, and the talking points. And again, the talking points, you don't have to say them verbatim, get comfortable with them, say it how you would like, but I don't want you to get these 5 pages of notes and go, oh my gosh, how am I gonna get through this? You're not. It's for you to have information, it's for you to read, get comfortable with. It's so that those of you that might have meetings from people that are less than enthusiastic about having to see you today, you're as equipped as possible as you can be for that. So fear not, but don't worry about the fact that you have so much stuff. It's only, we want you to be over-prepared. The other thing that I want to talk about is many of you in your appointments are going to be meeting with staffers. You might not get to meet with your actual representative, with your senator, with your congressman. And that's okay. That's not you being slighted. That's the way the cookie crumbles. One senator, one congressman cannot keep up with every single piece of legislation that is going to come across their desk. They have staff. They are subdivided by specialty, and those staff members are there to meet with you, hear what you have to say, and go back to their boss and say, you know what? There's 5,000 righteously motivated, educated, very respectful Christians on the Hill today, and they're concerned about these issues, and this is how you need to vote. So we'll talk more about that later as we unpack our talking points, but your takeaways from this little ditty are download your app, look at the working definition of anti-Semitism so you can be comfortable with that, confirm your appointments, again, which will be on the app, make sure that you don't miss those. Focus on the bold content that we're gonna give you in the talking points because that's the real meat of what you're gonna say. And some of you are gonna meet with staffers, and that's okay. That's the way it was planned. Do not feel like you are being slighted. It is still going to be a very effective meeting, and you're gonna be able to accomplish great things. Thank you so much for your time. I'm gonna throw it to the reason while we're all here. If you'll please make welcome again, Pastor John Hagee.
And she did all that off the top of her head. We have been waiting for Senator Marco Rubio to arrive. He has left Florida last night at 11 o'clock, and 2 flights were canceled. He took the early bird flight from Florida today to get here. He has just arrived. He is the chairman of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, and he serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Rubio is a stalwart supporter of the State of Israel, having sponsored multiple bills to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship and to protect Israel against those who seek to destroy her. Senator Rubio has taken a leadership role in fighting the BDS movement. He was the lead sponsor of both the U.S.-Israel Security Assistance Authorization Act of 2018 and Combating BDS Act of 2017. In the current Congress, he is the lead sponsor of the Strengthening America's Security in the Middle East Act and a co-sponsor of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. We are delighted to have with us today a senator who has supported us strongly and faithfully. Give him a rousing applause as he comes to this stadium, Senator Marco Rubio.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you. Thank you. I'm running late, so let's get going here. I apologize. I think I'm going to be followed shortly by my colleague, Senator Cruz, and I got to hurry because his speech will be longer than mine. We Cubans talk a lot, so you can't have 2 Cubans back to back at the same event like that. It's actually illegal in 14 states. But anyway, I apologize for being a few minutes late. I had some flight problems yesterday, got in last night, and then we drove in, and I made a right instead of a left, which put me in the Marriott, and I get there, and I see the Commerce Secretary walking in with security folks, and you just kind of assume I'm in the right place. And I'm sitting there for about 10 minutes saying, am I in the right place? And I realize I'm at some export control thing, and they're like, sir, we're ready for you to speak in 10 minutes if you'd like. And I go, on what? He goes, well, on China and whatever you want to speak about. It's like, well, I didn't bring my China speech, so. But anyway, I'm glad to be here with you, and then I got to run over there because now I own. But look, I'll be very quick. First of all, I always try to answer the why. Why is it that is so important that the U.S. and Israel and the strong alliance between our countries? And we have to answer that question again, because it has been part of our national consensus for 70 years, it's been bipartisan, that the United States and Israel relationship was a key one in the Middle East and one of the most important ones in the world. But for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, it's actually being questioned and challenged. And so it is incumbent upon those of us who support that alliance to express clearly to the American people, particularly to the young Americans who today are in high school and in college and beginning their lives, who one day will be sitting there or standing here or working in that building behind us down the street making decisions, why this alliance is so important. And the why begins with the fact that Israel, number one, is the only pro-American free enterprise democracy in the Middle East. That in and of itself is a reason to support them strongly. I would argue that if the Middle East had more free enterprise, pro-American democracy, that there were more countries like that in the Middle East, the world would be a lot safer than it is right now. The other reason is built on a strong moral principle. You know, Israel is the only country in the world was founded with a specific purpose, and that is to serve as a homeland for a people that faced extinction. We forget that the genesis of Israel, created by the international community in terms of its charter and its founding through the UN, was in the aftermath of the Holocaust. It was a global commitment that never again would there not be a place where the Jewish people could go and be safe after facing hundreds and thousands of years of persecution. And so these are the two whys behind our relationship. It is in our strategic and national interest, and it is a moral imperative. And this question needs to be answered because Israel faces the most daunting challenges it has faced in the better part of 3 decades. I don't have time to get into all of the challenges that surround them. You look to the north in Syria, where Hezbollah is rapidly expanding its capabilities, obviously into Lebanon, where its capabilities have exponentially grown from the last time, where ISIS elements and other radical jihadist groups are running loose throughout both Syria and parts of Iraq and growing in countries in the region. But the threat that I want to focus on primarily is one that most of these other threats I just mentioned emanate from, and that is Iran. It's interesting to watch the debates that are going on today about Iran. You see in the media people saying, well, all this stuff is happening because the president got out of the Iran deal. They make it sound like before the president took us out of the Iran deal, Iran was just Sweden, Belgium, Switzerland, Luxembourg. They were just a normal, regular country going about their business. It's absurd. Even with the Iran deal in place, Iran was doing all of the things that it was doing before that made it so dangerous to Israel and to the world. Every single one of those things. Here's how the Iran deal worked, basically. Number one, it wasn't a treaty. Congress never voted on it. It was a political agreement between the previous administration and a new administration. We made clear at the time that unless you came through Congress and had it approved, that's all it was, and it would end when that administration ended. It was one of the key issues that was debated in the 2016 campaign. It was a key point of contention between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And the American people voted for Donald Trump, who said clearly that he would end that deal if he became president, and that's what he's done. This wasn't some hidden agenda. He made it clear. I know it's shocking that you actually go ahead and do what you said you were going to do during the campaign, but it was out there. Everyone knew what was coming, including the Iranians and the Europeans and everybody else. But the Iran deal basically said, if you will not enrich to a certain level, we're going to open up the floodgates so your economy can prosper. Heck, we're even going to send you some cash. And what did Iran do with the benefits of economic opening? What did they do with the cash? Let me tell you what they didn't do. They didn't build roads. They didn't build bridges. They didn't invest back in their people. Here's what they did. What they did is they sponsored terrorism. They poured more money into Hezbollah. They poured more money into the militia groups that they've created and helped stand up throughout the region to act as proxies so they can kill and attack people but claim it wasn't them. That's what they did with the money. You know what else they did with the money? They continued to develop their long-range missiles. Now, what do you need long-range missiles for if it's not to deliver a nuclear warhead? Do they have a moon program? Are they going to put a man on the moon? Is there an Iranian program to get to Mars? Because these long-range missiles have only one purpose that makes sense, and that is to one day put long-range missiles on them, nuclear warheads on those missiles to threaten the United States, and they already can threaten Israel with the missile ranges they have now. They also conduct cyber attacks. And so that's what they did with the money from this deal. And it was a cunning plan, because their view is we'll open up the economy, We'll generate some money, we'll create these proxy forces and sponsor terrorism and cyber and build these missiles. And then in 10 years, when the world isn't looking or they're busy with something else, then we'll move on to get the warhead. So the deal, as it stood, allowed them to do these things. None of these things I just said, not the terrorism, not the missiles, not the cyber attacks, none of them violated that deal. That's why it was a bad deal. It allowed them to continue to be dangerous and hope and hold open the option at some point down the road to eventually build a warhead when they were ready for it. And so the president did the right thing by getting us out of this deal. So Iran goes to the European countries and says, well, now you guys are still in the deal. You got to figure out a way for us to continue to make this money. And the European countries are allies in many cases, but they want this deal badly. They tried. The problem they're facing is the companies that are doing business in Iran have general counsels and lawyers. And their lawyers are saying to them, well, listen, I don't care what the European Union does. If you do business in Iran, you won't do business in America. And a lot of these companies have made a decision. They'd rather do business in America than in Iran. So Iran then goes off and begins these attacks, and they think they can hide behind these irregular forces. Oh, we're going to attack and kill Americans like we did over the last 10 years. But it won't be us, it'll be the Houthis. It won't be us, it'll be the Shia militias. It won't be us, it'll be Hezbollah. But this administration called them out on it. And it's stunning. I saw in the media people were writing, well, how do we know that what you're saying is true? How do we know that this is really a threat? How do we know that those guys on that boat putting the mine on the side of a ship were Iranians? As opposed to who? Who were they? And for a long time, there was people in the media actually pretending as if this stuff was being made up, as if Iran had no history of this sort of thing. The reason why this is important is that ultimately the aim for Iran is regional domination. And their goal of regional domination begins with the destruction of the Jewish state. By the way, they like to say that every Friday, death to Israel, death to America. It's also not a secret. Again, you read some of the stuff in the press and you act like, yeah, look, they're not friendly with us, but we could live with them. Israel can't live with them. How can you live next to or near a country building long-range missiles with a nuclear program whose leaders openly talk about your destruction? And how can you take that lightly when your nation was founded in the aftermath of an effort to exterminate an entire people? And that is the challenge that we face. The second challenge, and it's the last one I'll touch on, there's so many more, is a global effort to delegitimize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And it's happening everywhere. It's spread into Europe, into international organisms, at entities at the United Nations that have sanctioned Israel more than every other country in the world combined in some years. Think about it. They spend more time sanctioning and going after Israel and condoning Israel and condemning Israel than they do North Korea, Venezuela, all these other dictatorships around the world. And this is the reason why earlier, well, let me go back briefly. Last year, I filed a bill. And all the bill said is if you are a U.S. state or city and you pass a law that says we, our government of the city, the county, or the state, are not going to do any business with you, a company, if you are part of the BDS movement, which is nothing but an effort to destroy Israel economically. That's what it is. It's anti-Semitism dressed up as foreign policy, dressed up as economic policy. That's what it is. And this was a bipartisan bill. And if we had voted on that bill in November, October of last year, it would have passed overwhelmingly, of course, signed by the president. And then the election happened in 2016. And a handful of new people came in. And all of a sudden, these people begin to oppose the BDS legislation. And in fact, go further in some of their sayings. One of them claimed that the reason we care about Israel is because of the Benjamins, meaning the money. An old anti-Semitic smear that's been used in the past. And for whatever reason, it was the first bill we took up this year in the Senate. And all of a sudden, it was controversial. All of a sudden, I had numerous colleagues of mine on the Democratic side come to me and beg me, can you take the BDS stuff out of the bill? We love the other stuff that's in it. Just take the BDS stuff out. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We were all for this just 3 months ago. What happened? And what happened is that there's a growing strain in American politics that supports the BDS movement. Now, they'll tell you, no, we don't. It's about free speech. That's a farce. It's a farce. There's nothing about free speech in this. It has nothing to do with free speech and the First Amendment. None. This has to do with government contracting. Because I can find 10 other issues that we're debating in America today that if you said a government has a right not to do business with a business that does or does not do X, you fill in the blank, any of these other policies that are out there, particularly promoted from the left, and everyone would be fine with it. Oh, governments have a right to boycott companies that are not doing the right thing on X, Y, or Z. But you scratch out X, Y, or Z and you write in Israel, and all of a sudden it's about the First Amendment and free speech? It's absurd. There is no First Amendment right to have a government contract. And that's all this bill does. So we passed it in the Senate. So we passed it in the Senate, and now it's languishing in the House. And their answer is, well, why don't we just vote on a resolution condemning anti-Semitism? I'm for it. Let's vote on that resolution and the BDS bill. In essence, let's condemn it in words and let's condemn it in action. And that became controversial. Well, it can't just be about anti-Semitism. It has to be about all hate. Fine, let's vote on something that condemns all hate, including anti-Semitism, but let's also do the BDS language. Well, we can't do that. This is what we're facing. This is a real threat. We can no longer take it lightly. We can no longer take it for granted that support for Israel in the United States is as widespread as it once was. And I hate to say this because I have great hope for America's future, but I mentioned this at the outset. If you go to the college campuses in America today, there is reason to be alarmed and concerned. The future members of Congress, the future members of the Senate, the future members of the cabinet, the future leaders of this movement and of this organization that are in college today are more likely than not on a campus where their professors are telling them that Israel is evil and illegitimate, and there is no way that doesn't have an impact down the road in our public policy unless we address it, unless we work harder than ever before to answer the why, as to why our relationship with Israel is so important. And that's why I'm so grateful to all of you for what you do. We can talk about these issues here, but it is impossible to make progress without thousands upon thousands of hardworking, everyday Americans who are spreading the word and are also taking action in support of the state of Israel. And so I'm here more than anything else to thank you for what you've done and continue to do, to thank Pastor Hagee, to thank this organization for all the work you're doing with all Americans, but particularly to focus on younger Americans. Because we are in a fight for this movement now and in the future, and we need all the help we can get. So thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for seeing me today here, although I was running late. Do you want to hear my China speech? No? All right, thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. All preachers are accustomed to people coming late. Senator Ted Cruz is coming this morning. It's my privilege to know Senator Ted Cruz for many years. Israel has no better friend in the U.S. Senate than Senator Cruz. He serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the Judiciary and Rules Administration Joint Economic Committees. He's a strong champion for Israel, having sponsored multiple bills to ensure Israel has the right to defend itself. Last year, one of CUFI's 3 legislative agenda items was a bill to impose sanctions on foreign persons who use innocent civilians as human shields, a bill Senator Cruz sponsored in the Senate. In December of last year, the President signed H.R. 3342 into law. More recently, Senator Cruz is the lead sponsor of a bill codifying the U.S. policy recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Would you give a warm welcome to Texas Senator Ted Cruz?
God bless CUFI. It is such a blessing to be with you this morning. Good morning. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for your willingness to stand up and engage and fight for America, fight for Israel, and fight for doing what's right. CUFI has an enormous impact here in Washington, across the country, and across the world. And what I want to talk to you about this morning is 5 victories. 5 victories that together we've won, and use those 5 victories to look forward to where we need to go from here. Victory number 1, Pastor Hagee just mentioned, was the human shields legislation that I introduced, that in Congress we passed into law in December. Now, what that legislation does is it says nations or organizations like Hezbollah or Hamas that use human shields against America or against our allies like Israel will face sanctions. Last year, CUFI engaged. You asked your members of Congress to pass that into law. The Senate passed it, the House passed it, and the President signed it into law. A second victory, again, Pastor Hagee referenced it, is the Golan Heights. For several years, I have been urging the administration to recognize the Golan Heights as part of Israel. Now, that at some level is simply acknowledging obvious reality. The Golan is, in fact, part of Israel. And nobody in their right mind would want Bashar Assad, would want Syria, much less the Iranians or the Russians, having control of the Golan Heights, having a dominating geographical position in the north of Israel. After making that case systematically, month after month after month, that we should recognize the Golan Heights, as you know, just a few months ago, the administration and the president recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel. A third victory is anti-Semitism. You know, all of us have been horrified in recent months looking at the House of Representatives, looking at this freshman trio of Democrats that can't seem to open their mouth without another anti-Semitic slur, without another attack on the nation of Israel, who say charming things like accusing Israel, saying it's all about the Benjamins. That's sadly a quote. Impugning that U.S. support for Israel is bought and paid for. And you know, that's a slur that we have seen for decades and centuries and even millennia. Well, it was even sadder when the House of Representatives tried to take up an anti-Semitism resolution. And Nancy Pelosi thought she had the vote. She took it up, and then she discovered her own conference, the Democratic conference, broke in half. And they couldn't do it. And they ended up instead passing this watered-down, anodyne resolution that condemned all forms of hatred and bigotry imaginable on earth. If you dislike anything according to the resolution, that's bad. Well, look, I saw that. I was deeply dismayed. And in the Senate, I introduced a resolution clearly, unequivocally, directly condemning anti-Semitism. Now, it was my objective, this needed to be a resolution that was bipartisan and that would pass. So I teamed up with a Democrat, Tim Kaine. And I went to Tim directly and said, Tim, what happened in the House is unacceptable. It is harmful. Let's show that the Senate can do better. We teamed up together on this resolution. We ended up getting 54 co-sponsors, including 12 Democrats. And then just a couple of weeks ago, Tim and I went to the Senate floor. We brought our resolution up, and we passed out of the United States Senate a clear and unequivocal resolution condemning anti-Semitism, and we passed it 100-0. So all of you are engaging with the Hill. Let me encourage you as an action item. Now that the Senate has passed this resolution, the House of Representatives needs to take it up and vote on it. And by the way, Nancy Pelosi can't say this is some right-wing conspiracy. It is the Cruz-Kaine resolution. The last I checked, Tim Kaine was the Democrats' vice presidential nominee in 2016. Not only that, Bernie Sanders is a co-sponsor. So let me ask you, how, if you're Nancy Pelosi, do you refuse to take up and pass an anti-Semitism resolution that passed the United States Senate 100-0? A fourth victory. Today, as we stand here today, the American embassy in Israel is in Jerusalem, the once and eternal capital of Israel. You know, that has been a battle that I have led in the Senate these past 7 years. We all know presidents of both parties have made the promise to move our embassy. And presidents of both parties have broken that promise. I can tell you within the Trump administration there was a major battle, a major argument over moving the embassy. Both the State Department and the Defense Department were opposed to moving the embassy. Both of them argued, no, if we move the embassy, the enemies of Israel will be really angry with us. Like they're so thrilled with us already. And I'll tell you, I engaged directly and vigorously and actively with the president, with the entire administration. And the case I made, you know, much of the argument State and Defense made is they had visions of Middle East peace. And they said moving the embassy will complicate that. And I said, look, I don't know if peace is achievable or not. But I can tell you this, it is more likely if we move the embassy. Because our Arab allies in the region, they'll feel condemned, whether it's the Saudis or the Jordanians or the Egyptians, they'll feel condemned to condemn it. They'll feel, because of domestic political needs, that they have to condemn it. But I said, I believe privately they will be deeply, deeply relieved. Because what they will say is a president and an administration that has the backbone to move the embassy to Jerusalem and to withstand the criticism of the New York Times maybe, just maybe, might also have the backbone to withdraw from the catastrophic Obama-Iran nuclear deal. And just a little over a year ago, I was there in Israel, in Jerusalem, the day we opened the embassy. I suspect a number of y'all were there as well. And I'll tell you, it was amazing as I visited with Americans, as I visited with Israelis. Number one, there was jubilation, there was dancing in the street. I've been to Israel many times. I've never seen such celebration and dancing in the street as there was on that day. But I remember visiting with one woman who was a Holocaust survivor. She had tears in her eyes. And she said, "I never thought I would live to see this day." That is a major and important victory, and CUFI played a major part in winning that victory. The fifth and final victory is the most important of them all, which is the very same week that we opened our embassy, the United States government withdrew from the disastrous Obama-Iran nuclear deal. That was the single most important national security decision the president has made. That, much like the embassy, was a battle within the administration, both state and defense. Everyone who didn't want to move the embassy made the same argument: we got to stay in this deal. We've got to continue sending billions of dollars to the Ayatollah Khamenei while he chants death to America and death to Israel. You know, if history teaches us anything, it is that if someone tells you they want to kill you, believe them. Now, I'll tell you, once we withdrew, this is where the details matter. We withdrew from the deal, but there were a series of waivers the administration put in place that kept significant components of the deal in place. In particular, there were oil waivers, and there were so-called civilian nuclear waivers. Well, I've been making the case for months that we should revoke both. On the oil waivers, we were allowing the Ayatollah to sell over 1 million barrels of oil a day, and that revenue was fueling the regime, the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Well, I'm happy to tell you, just in the last couple of months, the administration did the right thing and revoked the oil waivers, and the Ayatollah can't sell his oil anymore. As for the civilian nuclear waivers, there are a total of 7. We had a partial success. They revoked 2 of the 7. That was a step in the right direction. I'm grateful for that. There's still 5 in place, including we right now have in place today a waiver allowing the Ayatollah to conduct research at the Fordo nuclear bunker. This is a bunker built into the side of a mountain in Iran, designed to develop nuclear weapons to try to murder all of us. And our State Department has a waiver in place that says, oh, go ahead and do research there at that nuclear bunker built into the side of a mountain. Well, Iran is now declaring their intentions to enrich uranium and to break their side of the deal. There are 2 things that I think are critically important to do, which are, number one, we need to revoke every single one of the civilian nuclear waivers. That decision is teed up right now, so I encourage you to echo the importance of revoking the civilian nuclear waivers. And number 2, I believe in response to Iran's latest actions, we need to invoke what are called the snapback sanctions under the Iran deal, which means at the United Nations, that would force the rest of the world to impose sanctions as well. Under the terms of the deal, if Iran breaks their side, if they enrich uranium beyond the thresholds, the sanctions were supposed to snap back. Now, I'll tell you, the Europeans don't want to do it. And this, more broadly, I ask for your prayers and for your advocacy. Right now, the pressure on the president is enormous. The pressure from Europe. Europe believes it stands to make a lot of money by doing business with Iran. And if that means the Ayatollah gets billions of dollars to develop nuclear weapons that could murder millions of people across the globe, well, that's the cost of doing business. The single biggest national security victory of the Trump administration has been withdrawing from that deal. Right now, Europe is trying to convince the president, go back to the bargaining table and give the Ayatollah a lifeline, give the Ayatollah billions of dollars. We need to tell the president and the administration not only no, but hell no. And there is no message more important that y'all could convey than to convey to the administration and the president the importance of holding the line, of continuing to deny the resources to the Ayatollah. Let me make a final point about how catastrophically stupid this Iran deal was. You know, there's an old saying, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Back in the 1990s, when Bill Clinton was president, we had sanctions against North Korea. The whole world had sanctions against North Korea. And Bill Clinton led the world in relaxing sanctions against North Korea. And he did it in response to a promise from Kim Jong-il, then the dictator, Kim Jong-un's father, not to develop nuclear weapons. The lead negotiator on that deal was a woman named Wendy Sherman. She negotiated the deal, we'll give you billions of dollars in exchange for a promise, don't develop nuclear weapons. Well, we all know what happened. Kim Jong-il took the billions of dollars, used it to develop nuclear weapons, and we now have a maniacal dictator on the Korean Peninsula with nuclear weapons and ICBMs aimed at the United States of America. Fast forward to the Obama administration. Second term of Obama decides he wants his legacy to be an Iran deal. He recruits out of retirement Wendy Sherman to be the lead negotiator on the Iran deal. Now, she is literally the only person on the face of the planet who has screwed this up already. I want you to think about it. There's 7 billion people on planet Earth. You could walk up to a stranger on the street and say, excuse me, sir, have you negotiated a deal with a maniacal dictator giving him billions of dollars that resulted in their developing nuclear weapons? No? Okay, you're better qualified to lead this than Wendy Sherman. And she turned around and negotiated the same foolhardy deal, but in this instance, a deal with far greater consequences. Because the Ayatollah, Kim Jong-un, is a megalomaniacal dictator, but the Ayatollah is a religious theocrat and zealot who glorifies death and suicide. And when he refers to Israel as the little Satan and America as the great Satan, I believe he means it. And we need to do whatever is necessary to make sure that the Ayatollah never, ever, ever gets nuclear weapons. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Our final speaker this morning is Senator Tim Scott. He's running on a tight string, so I'll be very brief. In January 2013, Senator Scott was sworn in as a United States Senator from South Carolina and was re-elected in January of 2017. He is a lead sponsor of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act of 2019. That was what I was talking about in my speech last night. Senator Tim Scott is a great friend of Israel. He's a great supporter of CUFI. Would you give him a warm welcome?
CUFI! God bless you. Let's have a seat, have a seat. I'm only going to be with you for about 55 minutes, so I've got to hurry. But before I get started, I wanted to take the time to say to Pastor Hagee, thank you for decades of leadership, having the back of our nation's greatest friend, the state of Israel. Let's give him a round of applause. You see, the Bible reminds us, let's give it up for Pastor Hagee. The Bible reminds us in Proverbs 29:18 that without a vision, the people perish. They cast off restraint. And it also tells us in Matthew 18, verse 19, that when two or more gather together. Now I'm looking around. I see more than two gather together. When two or more gather together, touching and agreeing, they can do all kinds of amazing things if they have a vision. And Pastor Hagee had a vision. And he brought thousands upon thousands of Christians together to stand in the gap for the people of Israel, our Jewish brethren. God bless you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, I've had the chance to sit in the back and listen to my good friend Marco Rubio bring down the house. And I heard Ted Cruz with his 5 points of victories. And he had a rousing standing ovation. And I thought to myself, there's no reason for me to do what they've already done, which is to talk about the necessity of legislative victories. And yes, I am the primary sponsor of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. And I am thankful. I am thankful. Thank you. I am thankful that you all are here today to go on the Hill and to tackle the important responsibility of expanding the number of sponsors so that we can do what we've done before, which is to see the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act fly through the Senate and head to the House. And that's where we know we're going to need some prayer. Because for the first time in America's history, we have members of Congress, members of the United States Congress, sharing anti-Semitism from the nation's capital. We, the people, have to stand to our feet and be heard in the halls of Congress. We must say, not here, not now, not ever. Our nation stands toe-to-toe, back-to-back with the people of Israel because it's God's will that we, the people, bring it to the House. You see, I'll tell you, a part of it is just selfishness on my part. I believe that when Psalms 122:6 says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem And for those who do, they will prosper. I believe that when my God gives me a clear path to prosperity, it is in my best interest and your best interest to follow the path that God lays down with breadcrumbs all the way to the promised land. I don't need, I'm just an elected official, so sometimes you got to make it real simple for us. But that's pretty simple. When the Lord God tells us that he loves his people so much that if you will pray for his people, that there is a corresponding benefit that manifests for you. You see, while I am an elected official, I thank God Almighty that he has a great sense of humor. I failed civics in high school. Now, for those of you who are unaware, civics is the study of politics. God's got a sense of humor. But in this nation, a poor boy in a single-parent household, lost as a goose in a rainstorm, can get a second chance because America is the land of redemption. We should take a stand. I am thoroughly convinced that in this land, our most important weapon is not legislation. And I hope we continue to see my act become law. I am thankful that we have members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who believe in our responsibility of defending Israel. That is a very important consideration. But our most important asset as a nation was perhaps spoken in the 1800s by Alexis de Tocqueville that said America will cease to be great when America ceases to be good. And then he went on to say, if you want to see the goodness of America, he didn't find it in Washington, D.C. or in the government. He did not find it in our schools, though we need a whole lot of help in a lot of our schools. He said he found it in the houses of worship. He found it when he sensed this fire coming from this house of worship. You see, our greatest asset is when the people of God are praying and they're touching and agreeing, and then they get up off their knees and follow James 2:17 that says faith without works is dead. We the people, if we are united on a cause and we get up and go down the crumb-filled road, we can bring this world together. You see, I am convinced that America's not-so-secret weapon is sometimes asleep at the wheel. I'm convinced that some of the things that challenges our nation today is a response to too many of those of us endued with this power have forgotten how good our God is and how great our God is when we are being the hands and feet of a risen Savior. You see, I believe that we stand in the gap for this nation and this world. And as we take our rightful place, this nation will follow. There's a reason why 2 Chronicles 7:14 reminds us to pray and repent. But then we got to turn. I'm telling you that if we the people will do all that we know to do that is consistent with the written Word of God, the blueprint for our lives, the blueprint for our country. Our founding fathers founded this nation on a Judeo-Christian foundation because they understand the good book. They understood the Bible. They understood the necessity of having a foundation that doesn't shake. And if we will do that, and we will be active in our legislative priorities, we'll be active in our communities, we'll be active in our churches, we will see a Holy Ghost fire consume this nation in a way we haven't seen in a very long time. And we will feel in our hearts and see with our eyes the glory of the Lord who loves us. In that day, America's finest hour will be seen, it will be felt, and it will be measured. I'm telling you that yes, it's a blessing to be in the nation's capital. It's a blessing to have a president who took us out of a bad deal, the JCPOA, that only was nothing less than a year run towards nuclear weapons. It's a wonderful place where we have a president who moved our embassy to Jerusalem. It's a wonderful nation to live in because we can stand together and praise together. Not pray, but praise together. But it has to be protected. It has to be protected. And I think if we pray and then walk towards the priorities that God has for us, we'll have fewer battles with Iran. You see, there is a respect that comes to the most powerful nation when the people of that nation can be seen and heard, and then in an intangible way, you can feel the power emanating from the prayers. I think we have to do both, and if we do both, next year and the year after, as we come here for a CUFI gathering of the brethren, we'll be here celebrating the folks who are walking back from the nation of America, who are saying, I don't want none of that. I don't want none of that. In other words, that's a way of saying that the stronger we are in our prayer life, the stronger we are in our faith life, the stronger we are by being actively involved and engaged in making this nation live up to the full potential of our country, the more our adversaries walk away. Praise God.
Christians United for Israel is not practicing. They're not playing. What is happening here at the summit is world-changing. This is where we come to the epicenter of decisions being made that are affecting policy and nations around the world, in particular Israel. When you can add your voice to something like that on Capitol Hill, it gives purpose, it gives definition, it's biblical, it's historical proportions. CUFI is a vehicle to give you capacity and access to something you will never have on your own, information. We become informed Christians, informed citizens, that we go back to our homes and we can affect change there in our congregations and our communities, with our children, on campuses. What CUFI is doing is beyond a church event. It's not just a religious event. It's more than a Bible. I love that it's all of that, but it's even more. It's affecting our culture, and I'm grateful to be a part of what's happening because we're seeing good take place. We're watching good defeat evil, and that's where we are, and CUFI is making that happen.
Good morning. You know, the only way we can top Senator Scott is if we do an altar call right now. And as Gary Bauer just said, baptisms will begin in 10 minutes. Hey, that was incredible. That's the quality of speaker you have here at the Christians United for Israel Summit every year. And by the way, are you having a good 2019 CUFI Summit? Well, it's about to get even better. Not only will you hit Capitol Hill and speak in one united voice, but we have a very special guest right now coming straight from the White House. You may remember Paul Teller, our good friend from last year's CUFI summit. He's a special assistant in the office of President Trump for legislative affairs. He's working closely with the president, the vice president, the entire administration on a host of very important issues. He's been described in the past as one of the most influential, in his former job, one of the most influential aides on Capitol Hill. We're honored to have Paul Teller with us today. Paul, welcome to the CUFI Washington Summit.
Appreciate it. Great to be here.
Great to have you.
True honor as always.
Yeah. Now, you've been working here, some call it the swamp. It's getting a little better the past few years, though. You've been working here on the Hill, in the White House. You've been here in D.C. working for 16 years across 3 different administrations. Paul, how have you seen the U.S.-Israel relationship develop and grow during that time, in particular under the Trump administration?
Yeah, appreciate it. First of all, great to be here. Tremendous honor to share the stage with the likes of Tim Scott and my former boss, Ted Cruz. Right. Unbelievable privilege, unbelievable honor. So always appreciate being thought of. Yeah, how has the relationship changed? So yeah, as Eric was saying, 16 and a half years on Capitol Hill, now 2.5 years in the Trump White House, another tremendous privilege. How has the U.S. relationship changed with Israel? Honestly, it's just become even more secure, more honest, right? I mean, think about it. So much of my time on Capitol Hill, the last couple decades, let's say, there were a lot of promises made, right? We will do this for Israel. We will do that. And there were ceremonies and things like that. But the embassy never got moved. The PL office still existed robustly here in Washington, D.C. We funded UN offices that funded the Palestinian terrorist operation and stuff like that. That's not happening anymore. So the relationship is...
It's a new day.
It's a new day. It's honest. It's frankly, it keeps in line with President Trump's posture on so many other things. He makes a promise, and he keeps his promise. And he promised these things in 2016, and he has kept these promises, and we're seeing that today.
Yeah. Paul, you think about all the administrations that promised to move the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Only one president, only one administration did that. That's President Trump.
Appreciate it.
Now, you're a very busy man. You're in the White House on a daily basis. You have 2 beautiful young children. Busy man. So tell us about your role at the White House. Yeah. What do you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So I'm blessed to be, again, in the Legislative Affairs shop. We have a new director named, a gentleman by the name of Eric Euland, and we report straight up to the Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, and of course, the Vice President and the President. What I specifically do is work with some of the most conservative members of the House and the Senate. So folks like Ted Cruz, Rand Paul,
the good
Tom
guys.
Cotton, Mike Lee, you know, the folks that you would say probably cover the right flank on the Senate. And on the House side, you may have heard of folks from the House Freedom Caucus, Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, these kinds of folks. Fantastic heroes who are, of course, the best on Israel. And one other component that they've added to my job that I think is unique to this administration is I also work with a lot of the outside groups, like CUFI, an important ally, to help advance the president's legislative agenda. In other words, this president understood just working directly with conservative members of the House and Senate is good, but it's not a complete picture unless you're also collaborating with outside groups, with citizen activists, citizen leaders, to, as kind of one unit, advance the president's legislative agenda. It's been working great.
Yeah, Paul, that's a great point. It seems like this administration gets it when it comes to Christians, when it comes to the pro-Israel movement, and like you said, having real, tangible contact with the grassroots, right, with the voters.
Exactly. And it helps keep things fresh, too, right? In other words, we're not just talking to ourselves here in Washington. Exactly. We're hearing from real Americans and what they think and what they feel, and I got to tell you, it's so refreshing. Specifically in the Legislative Affairs, most of us are located in the East Wing of the White House, which the only reason I say that is that's also, if you ever get a tour of the White House, that's where the tours come through. And it's such a pleasure every day to see real Americans coming through those doors to see the support for this president, for this agenda, for Israel. Frankly, we see pro-Israel stuff coming through those doors every day. And in my office, in the East Wing, bolted, cemented into the walls, literally, are these huge pro-Trump, pro-Zionist signs that, let me tell you, could never have been allowed in the previous White House.
No.
So they are proudly right there in my office. And they're copies of ones, for those of you who've been to Israel recently, they're copies of the ones that are all over Israel. The Thank You President Trump sign, the God Bless America, and Thank You President Trump. So miniature versions in my office, proudly in the White House. Fantastic.
Folks, just a reminder, what Paul is describing, these pro-Israel signs and messages, it's in the White House today in 2019. That deserves some applause. Wow. Paul, you talk about some folks in Washington, D.C. being in a bubble. Surprise, surprise. We don't have that with this administration. But look, you've been here for 16 years. You've seen it all on the Hill, the battles, the squabbles. Tell us about some of the biggest hurdles you have faced in advocating for a strong America and a strong Israel here in D.C.
That's a great question, some of the hurdles. And let's face it, if we had 4 hours, we could continue to list hurdle after hurdle after hurdle. But a few just for this short conversation today. I think one is, well, let's say two things. One is, we hinted at this before, there's sometimes a sense of, well, why do it now, right? It'd be a little bit tough to do it now, be a little trouble. It may keep us from our recess. It may keep us here late at night. We'll do it another time. Ultimately, though, when you keep saying that, things never get done. It's what we were alluding to before about some of the promises with respect to Israel were not getting done. Finally, this president said, just stop. The time is now, and let's get it done. So that's one hurdle that I think we overcame.
How refreshing.
And that's great. But the second hurdle, and this is especially relevant to this crowd, is I think sometimes on the Hill there's so much focus. This is going to sound silly, but I'll explain what I mean in a second. There's so much focus on policy substance that unfortunately you forget to look at the process of how the substance gets done. Perfect example of what I mean by that relevant to this. The Iran nuclear deal. Obviously, so many folks in the pro-Israel community were focused on beating the deal itself. Meantime, the folks who wanted the deal to go into effect were working on a congressional process that made it so that it was going to automatically go into effect unless Congress disapproved of it with a supermajority. So they beat us in using process. They used a process that was basically going to ensure that it was going into effect. Whereas if maybe we had focused more energy on the process, it could have been beaten more in its infancy. I don't know, but that's one hurdle that I think keeps coming up is not enough focus on the procedure, on the parliamentary procedure that gets things done or stops the bad things.
Yeah, and I love this, Paul, because you're describing it, me personally even, sometimes some of the battles, the legislative process on Capitol Hill can be over your head a little bit, but you're breaking it down in an easy to understand way. I know we all
try,
appreciate.
It's hard, it is complicated.
Yeah,
right.
But we all appreciate the way you're breaking it down for us, especially today as we go to Capitol Hill. We have anti-Semitism rising around the world. We've had some horrific, deadly anti-Semitic attacks here in the U.S. over the past year. With that going on, Paul, what role do you think groups like CUFI can play? Look, we're at 7.1 million strong right now. How important is our role?
So important. First of all, just look at this room. Unbelievable, right? I mean, a few years ago, you could have met in a small restaurant somewhere around town. This is unbelievable. It's just, what an inspiration. And I should say that, and we should have said this earlier, I'm one of the Jewish guys in the White House. So thank you. So I only say that just so that I wish you could see from my eyes what it looks like. Just even looking at the sign, right? Christians united for Israel. Christians defending the Jewish homeland. It's amazing. Gives me the chills.
It's a movement.
Yeah. And so then to hear that paired with that movement is Christians fighting anti-Semitism also gives me chills shooting up my spine. And it's so important. So what I think this group could do and what you've been doing is showing that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Right? That's the thing. If you can keep echoing that message, that helps us Jewish folks, and frankly, I think it helps the whole pro-Israel movement, because let's face it, a lot of folks are hiding or trying to hide their anti-Semitism behind this veil of anti-Zionism. Well, I disagree with the Israeli government, their policies, their interactions with foreign nations. no, you really just don't like Jewish people, right? Why don't we just say it? You don't want Israel to exist, and you don't like Jewish folks. Just say it. So ripping that veil off, making them more honest and more accountable, will, I think, help us fight and defeat anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So grateful.
Yeah, amen. And these so-called anti-Zionists you describe, Paul, we have some of them elected members of Congress who hold these views, as senators discussed earlier. Folks, let's get it straight. Let's pull no punches. If you hate the Jewish state, you are an anti-Semite. Newsflash.
That's right. And frankly, that's another thing we should say for your previous question. Another thing CUFI can do and has been doing, just amplify those statements when those members of Congress do say these horrible things. Amplify it. In other words, make sure your neighbors hear about it. Make sure folks see, look at what they're saying, look at who is saying it, and let's hold them accountable. Don't let them get away with these statements.
That's right.
So.
That's right. Absolutely. Okay. You are a man of faith, a strong faith, growing as you come to CUFI every year.
Right.
Tell us how your faith shapes your work at the White House.
It's interesting, and again, this would be another 4-hour conversation. It's complicated because, my politics obviously are very conservative, very right-wing. I grew up, though, in this more liberal Jewish tradition. So there's that conflict there, and so it's hard. Growing up, it's been hard to be kind of Jewish and politically conservative at the same time. I know that's not actually impossible, but culturally, it isn't the easiest thing in the Jewish world. And actually, relevant to this audience, quick story. So I was speaking just a few weeks ago to a gathering here in town of some politically and religiously liberal Jewish folks. It's a long story, we'll get to that another time. But I was doing my best to try to find things we agree on, even with President Trump. And believe it or not, we found some things. Criminal justice reform, for example, is something that crossed the aisle, left and right, and there was a bipartisan consensus. I tried to find other things. And I got applause, or sometimes just neutral, polite smiles, whatever. One thing that got sneers, not sneers, but just when you hear people chattering in the audience with a little bit of the disapproval, was when I said, by the way, we as Jews should know that our best friends, our best defenders are evangelical Christians. Yeah. And when I said that, that's when I started losing the audience. It was interesting. So I only bring that up to say, I think we as a pro-Israel movement maybe have some work to do to convince my less than pro-Israel Jewish friends and family that you are their best friends. You are our best friends and best defenders. Yeah. So I know that's a complicated answer to your question, but it's
a good one.
It's been an interesting path that we could dig into over a libation sometime.
But we're on the right path, I think. Yeah. And we have 7.1 million, and we have thousands in this room right now standing boldly and unapologetically with Israel and the Jewish people. We're on the right path, folks. We are, as Paul said.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier, Paul, about the process on Capitol Hill, and sometimes certain politicians are hesitant to do the right thing because they're worried about what people will say, what the media will say. I think of this president, and he does the right thing. I think about moving the embassy to Jerusalem. There's been so many accomplishments, recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan. You see this on a daily basis. You're involved in these conversations with the president. What do you think is the Trump administration's greatest achievement so far in the Middle East? Again, that could be another 4 hours.
That would be another 4. Exactly. Wow, how to boil it down to just one, right? Yeah. Look, and I know it's almost going to sound cliche, especially if this is day 3 of gathering, but I really think we have to put that paired action of moving the embassy and recognizing Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel as the top thing. Yeah. It's hard to see how anything tops that, both substantively or symbolically.
It was history.
But you're right. I mean, you could just go down the list, whether it be Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, defunding UNRWA, right? Pulling out of the UN Human Rights Council, obviously pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, reimposing the pre-existing sanctions, and now we've got new sanctions. I don't know if you followed some of these, but the sanctions, which can very easily be found on the Treasury Department's website, if you go under press releases, just go practically on a weekly basis. There's new sanctions there targeting the individual leaders of the Iranian regime, not necessarily the country as a whole all the time, but going after them personally. It's fantastic.
The head of the snake.
No, that's right. And then look, another, maybe you could call this an accomplishment, a success. I think we have to say personnel as policy. So what about people like Ambassador David Friedman? Oh my God, right? How excellent is he? Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, unbelievable.
Yeah. You just missed them. They were all here yesterday.
They were all here, and oh my God, Vice President Michael R. Pence, unbelievable. Who I also had the privilege of working for directly many years ago when he was just a congressman. So it's been great to partner with him for so many years. So point being, I wish I could pick just one, but there really is such a list of
the bottom line is good things are happening for the U.S.-Israel relationship.
No
Great
question.
things are happening. Okay, you got to run. You're a tad bit busy at the White House.
That's all right.
Quick last question.
Oh, yeah.
2 children, I believe you said 16 and 13, a boy
Correct.
and a girl.
Yeah, older girl, right?
Big Duke basketball fan.
Yes,
We were
absolutely.
talking.
There we go.
Yes, we might have some Tar
They're
Heel
Tar Heel,
fans here too. It's controversy
Nobody's
here.
perfect, that's okay.
Last question before you run, Paul. What motivates you? We talked about your faith, but you're here. You know, you're here in D.C. It can be a tough job. You're in the White House, long hours. What's your motivation?
Oh, I love it. That's a great question. Honestly, just this confluence of people and ideas, meaning, you know, anybody could have great ideas, right? But if you can't connect with people to enact them, they're not going to go very far. On the other side, there's people who are great at schmoozing, right? You'd love to have a drink with them in a bar, or you'd love to, you know, go to a sporting event with them, whatever it is, but maybe they don't have the greatest, you know, ideas to advance this nation. But in this town, you find so many folks that are right at the intersection of people and ideas, and I get to work with so many of them every day. So, you know, to get up and share the battle lines with like-minded colleagues and finding success, and we're not sick of the success yet. It's a true honor and a true privilege.
Yeah. Well, it's been our honor and privilege to have you today, Paul. Folks, please give a big hand to Paul Teller.
Appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Great job.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Today, we are seeing the rise of an old enemy wearing a new mask. Once, anti-Semitism was displayed by those in white hoods or wearing the twisted cross of the swastika. But today, this old hatred hides in plain sight. Only a decade ago, anti-Semites were shunned and despised. Now, this appalling bigotry has a platform on Twitter and is applauded in the public square. Anti-Semites rail against Israel on our college campuses. They break bread with elected officials. They commit acts of heinous violence in our cities. They may not wear the uniforms of their forefathers, but today's anti-Semites are more dangerous than ever. Today, anti-Semites wrap themselves in the flags of faith, social justice, and liberty. They contort the very concepts Americans hold so dear. So let us not be blind to the anti-Semitism that hides in plain sight. Words like anti-Zionism serve as fig leaves for bigotry. For decades, support for Israel transcended party, ideology, and faith in this country. But today, the loss of objective truth and the acceptance of moral ambiguity have enabled anti-Semitic movements to spread like cancer. CUFI was built for such a time as this. We will not let this darkness dim our light, for Christians are a light unto the world, and Israel is a light unto the nations. So shine bright. Shine the light on anti-Semitism that hides in plain sight, from churches to college campuses, from state capitals to Congress. We at Christians United for Israel seek to be a light in the darkness. As light conquers darkness, so shall we conquer this anti-Semitic scourge. Join us. Don't curse the darkness. Shine the light.
All right. Does everybody have their talking points? They're being handed out as we speak. Now the work begins. Yesterday I was, like most of you, on my feet all day and wearing heels. Today I'm wearing flip-flops. That's because we still got a lot of work to do, and we want to make sure that it all gets done, amen? How about Senator Scott, though? Oh my goodness. If the senator thing doesn't work out, he can always preach.